Hello friends, so today's video is going to be a new releases wrap up specifically for Legends and Lattes, Children of Ragnarok, and Hat Atelier. So with two of these, they came out in November, and then with Legends and Lattes, it came out in June, and since we're currently in the first month of 2023, there's not a whole lot to talk about just yet, because not that much has come out, which is why I'm talking about some of the ones that came out in the latter half of 2022. I'm going to start with Legends and Lattes. This is one that a lot of you have been recommending to me, and my patrons ended up voting on this one for me to read first from my older new releases that I wanted to get around to, older new releases. And this was just as cozy as everyone has said. It is honestly more of a contemporary within a fantasy world, as opposed to a fantasy that feels cozy. So it doesn't have a sense of adventure. It doesn't have a big emphasis on romance, which I found is rather true of a fair amount of cozy fantasy I've come across. And I wouldn't say it feels particularly nostalgic necessarily. I'll get into that a little bit more. It really does just feel like you are following a person who's wanting to pursue their dreams, but in a way that's much calmer and more fulfilling and more joyful. The setup is that you follow a woman named Viv, who is a battle-weary orc who's done with that life. She's done with the bloodshed, and she just wants to settle down and have a more peaceful career that is specifically rooted in starting up a coffee shop. And so you see her in her last job, and now she is ready and she's willing to put in the work and build up from almost literally the ground up, build her coffee shop. And she kind of recruits people along the way, hires people along the way to help her with this dream of hers. And very much this story has a sense of found family, the people that Viv interacts with, both in helping her build the building. It was a pre-existing building that she's kind of converting into a coffee shop. So she has somebody who does a lot of woodworking who is helping her. She has somebody that's going to help her run the shop and the cafe. And then she has somebody who's going to be baking things for her, because they figured it'd be great if somebody made food to go along with this coffee. And it's just really wholesome to see this sense of found family. And it also, the fantasy elements, and this is the part that might feel a little bit nostalgic, not the plot, not the way the story is written, but the fantasy types of people that you get in the story. Obviously, Viv herself is an orc, and then you see certain other characters represent different kinds of humanoid-like beings that we're pretty accustomed to in sword and sorcery type of fantasy. But the author has essentially taken a sword and sorcery setting and then made a contemporary story within that. And I think that this was kind of brilliant, because we're so used to, in the fantasy genre, a certain kind of fantasy setting. And actually most of us, I would say, want to deviate from that. We're kind of been there, done that. We want to see something new. And so when people return to worlds that have orcs and elves and such, we're kind of like, okay, you better do something really new with this. But I feel like what was kind of brilliant is we're so accustomed to this type of world. It's not all that different for us if we were to pick up a story that exists in our own world. It's like it's already a setting we're familiar with to some degree, and then the author is taking a lot of people's love for coffee or even just cafes, and it just feels like a book lover's or a fantasy book lover's dream cafe. Like it feels like if any of you like to put on an ambiance when you read and you type in fantasy cafe or something. I don't know if anyone else does that, so I don't know if I'm showing how stupid I am. I don't know. But it's like he made that idea into a book, and it was just as wholesome as everybody says. I think that the found family aspect is really sweet. There is a little bit of a romance in the story, and it is also really sweet. Probably one of my favorites that I've come across, just because it builds very naturally. It builds kind of slowly. The characters get to know each other. They care about each other. And there's kind of a friendship initially. There's also first impressions to kind of go against, because a lot of times we have preconceived notions of who people are based off of little details, and then it's kind of going against that and kind of really getting to the heart of a person. The stakes, I think the story says something like, I can't remember, but it's a high fantasy with low stakes, something like that. And that's definitely very true. The stakes, though, were, I don't want to say they were higher than I expected, but I was really invested to a point where I was really sad when bad things would happen, because I was so connected to this character and her dream. And I'm like, do just want you to have your coffee shop. I don't want anything to go wrong. I don't want any obstacles to get in your way. So when negative things do happen, even if it's not end of the world level or the whole city, there's this plot against the whole city or something, it's little things, but it's a very intimate setting. It's a very intimate feel. And so the little things are enormous for the characters. And I think that just made it feel all the more cozy, if you will. And I do think that if you need a little bit of a break between a lot of the more epic fantasy or the more devastating fantasy, you just need something kind of uplifting, but you still want to be in a fantasy world, then this one is perfect for that. After that, we have Witch Hat Atelier. So volume 10 came out in November, and I feel like this is my new I'm not gonna shut up about it story, because Witch Hat Atelier is so good. It is so good. So by the time this video goes up, there will be chats over on my other channel, my full meta analysis channel, and it's myself, my husband, and my friend Patrick, and we go through and chat about the first 5 volumes, and then in the next video we talk about volumes 6 through 10. So if you are somebody who wants to talk about spoilers, because there are things to talk about in this, then I'll have those linked. But Witch Hat is so good. When you first start it, it also seems like it's cozy fantasy. And I say seems like because I think it gets a lot darker than maybe the beginning would lead you to believe. Not dark in a way where it's going to ever be extremely grim and shock value type of violence or anything like that, but some of the moral questions that arise in reading this story really are devastating, and you have to kind of wonder, am I on the right side, if you will? So there's a lot to the antagonists and their perspectives where even if you're not really seeing them, you start to understand them. And it's, I think, really interesting to have a distant antagonist, which the series, the first 10 volumes, the antagonist does feel distant. To have a distant antagonist and still have it feel like you're chipping away at the protagonist. You're chipping away at the morality of the people who you've been following without even really seeing a whole lot of them. And I don't want to say too much, but there are some really devastating consequences as a result of the principles that our characters hold themselves to. But on top of all of that, the main character, Coco, is just such a wonderful main character because she has this sense of wonder and love of magic. If you don't know what this is about, it follows Coco, who is sad that she doesn't have access to magic, and then it turns out that maybe there's a chance that her love of magic might actually be able to be realized, and so then she's pursuing that. And in that pursuit, she is continuously awed by magic, but then starts to see the darker sides of it as well, and a lot of the, I'll call it politics. The story where Volume 10 leaves off makes me think we are going to get a lot more of the political side of things in this world. I have no idea how many volumes there will eventually be, but I hope that this series goes on for a really long time. I think most of the time in fantasy, we think, okay, we probably could have trimmed some of the fat in that massive tome of a story, or with manga, it's like, does it really need to be that many volumes? This could go on for so long. As soon as I finished Volume 10, I was so sad that I had to wait till July for Volume 11, and I just want to go back and read it again. And on top of all that, I've said it already, I've said it many a time, the artwork is so good. It's so good. I am currently also reading Vagabond, which is known for having some of the best artwork, and I'm like, I might like the art in this more. This is some of the most beautiful art. I mean, just look at this. Just look at the cover of Volume 10, and then imagine, it's not all in color, but just imagine panel after panel after panel of this breathtaking art. The artist also does really unique things with the paneling, and then it's also adorable. There's also a cute factor, especially with the brush buddies. It's so good. I say an infinite amount of wonderful things about this series. I love it so much. Please pick up Witch Hat Atelier. It is wonderful. And then last for today, we have Children of Ragnarok by Cindy Williams Chima. I feel as though this has gone a little bit under the radar because Cindy Williams Chima is a pretty well-known fantasy author, and I know a lot of people on BookTube really love the Seven Realms Quartet. It's down there, and I don't think I've seen too many people talk about this, and there's very few ratings up currently, and that saddens me because this was very good. And if I were to compare it to anything, I would compare it to Seven Realms, not because I think that it's a one-trick pony, she has this one story to tell, and then she's just changing up the setting and the characters or anything like that, but because Seven Realms stands out among, it is young adult fantasy, but it stands out in that there's this sense of nostalgia. There's this, when you read that series, you kind of feel transported, and you're completely, or at least I was, willing to follow her and follow her characters wherever they took me. Because there's something about the way she writes where it truly feels like I'm following these characters at this time in their life in this world, as opposed to I'm being told a story, or we're trying to get from point A to point B, here's the plot, and so sometimes we sacrifice wonderful time with characters because we got to keep things moving. I never felt like that with her works. I always feel like I'm just following, it feels like you're following real people. They start out flawed, they are flawed individuals, and in Seven Realms you see them grow throughout the quartet, so they're a little frustrating initially, and the growth though is fantastic. I think they behave like a young person who's not that experienced in the world would behave. Anyway, I'm talking a lot about Seven Realms, but what I'm getting at is I felt very similar to this one, where I felt like I was transported to this world. It is Nordic inspired, as you can probably guess by the Children of Ragnarok title. And so we do have this sort of established lore to the story, and then she is building off of that. And another thing she does so fantastically is she starts you off feeling very close to the characters and like you're getting a small amount of the world, and then as the story progresses, the stakes become bigger, not just for the character, but they kind of go outside the character, and then you see more of the world alongside that. So we follow three main perspectives in this, and Eirik, immediately loved Eirik, felt for Eirik. You also follow his sister, and then you get one other perspective, and their names are Liv and Reagan. So Eirik and his family, the setup is that his father and grandfather have passed away. His mother owns a very profitable farm, and she did remarry, and the person that she married is very cruel. He harms her, he harms Eirik, and Eirik is getting to a point now where he's old enough, he's close to being able to fight back, but he also has to be careful because if he pushes his stepfather too far, there's a chance that his stepfather will kill him. And his mother becomes pregnant, and so now there's even a bigger threat to Eirik's life because this stepfather of his can probably take out Eirik, and then the farm would then be in his bloodline. It would be his child who gets it. And so Eirik is now somewhat afraid for his life. He's concerned for his mother, he's concerned for the baby, and he's concerned for his sister. Right away, this setup was just something that even in a fantasy setting, this is something where you feel so much for this character. It doesn't feel like this abstract, you have to understand the world, you have to understand the magic to understand why this is a big deal. It's very clear why it's a big deal, and you care for this character so much. And then from there, like I said, as the story progresses, it goes beyond just Eirik and his family, and you get a little bit more of Reagan. Reagan, you start to see more of the magic of the world through her perspective, and then Liv is kind of a wild card, and when she shows up, you're like, I don't know what's going on with Liv. Liv doesn't really get her own perspective the way that Eirik and Reagan do, so you're really more looking at two perspectives, and then Liv, the wild card element, I think is enhanced by the fact that you don't really get her perspective, but you're kind of eyeing her for the whole time, like, what's going on with you anyway? So I really liked all of these characters. I thoroughly enjoyed going through this world with them, and there are certain aspects that feel very much like an appreciation of this mythology, and like she's tying it in a way that you appreciate, and you're like, okay, you did your research, but at the same time you're making it your own. And I think that's a hard balance to hit. So that's it for this new releases wrap up. I'm so excited because these were all great, and I feel like reading has started off with a bang at the beginning of this year. Hopefully all of you are really enjoying what you've been picking up. I will be continuously doing new releases wrap-ups, and because I have a tendency to yammer on for a really long time, I kind of like the idea of doing it in groups of 3. But let me know if there's any new release books that you've picked up thus far, or any from last year that you have finally gotten around to here in the first month of 2023. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.